Awesome. Thank you. Kia ora koutou katoa. Welcome to RaC Guild Townhall number 8. It's great to see so many people here today and more coming in. Please do just come in and join us. I am super excited to introduce our special guest for today, Josh from Ackama in Wellington, who, well, I'll let him tell the story, but let me just say I am really pleased that I was introduced to Josh when I was, because an enormous rules as code project that we'd started would just not be the same as it is today without him. And with that, we'll jump straight in, Josh, and then a few questions after Josh's presentation, and then more from Jason. Wonderful to have you back, Jason. Thank you very much indeed. Looking forward to that update as well. So yeah, we'll get going. There'll be time for questions. So
do we want to do some intros first, Jo, too? I think there's a few new people who might be their first time here.
Cool. So hands up, new people. I can see, I can see Kurt. Hi, Kurt. Where are you dialing in from?
Hi, yeah, I'm dialing in from Melbourne. I've just started as the CTO at Salsa Digital. Awesome. I've actually been quite interested in the RaC space for quite a few years now. I've just left the Victorian government. So yeah, I'm excited to find out about what's happening in RaC Guild.
Awesome. Welcome. Who else do we have? Piers, I think.
Hi.
Hi.
Nice. Jason introduced me to the group. I am the principal software engineer. I have about 7 years experience and almost no experience with rules as code. So I'm looking to learn, 100% new to the space, very excited to learn about it. I've been talking to Jason about it, and I'm fascinated.
Awesome. There's lots to be fascinated with today. Believe me, looking forward to this. Who else have we got that I can't see? Maybe.
I think maybe Jersey, Misha, and Chandra are new.
Okay, Jersey, do you want to go first?
I think that's Matthew Waddington, is it?
It's Matthew Waddington, yes. Hello.
Hi, Matthew.
I'm Matthew Waddington from the Jersey Legislative Drafting Office.
Ah.
So I'm a drafter, been interested in rules as code for some time, and we're running a project in our office trying to involve legislative drafters in the process.
Fantastic. Look forward to hearing about that project. Chandra. Hi there.
Hi. Morning. I'm Chandra Shekhar, portfolio architect at MPI. We started looking into the rule as a code as part of standardizing import and export standards and regulations as an opportunity to use it. So part of discussion, we reached out to a couple of experts here who played around this role, worked in this area before as a beta rules, and we have found out it's like this has got a great opportunity. So to standardize the standards, legislations. So I'm here to hear the experts' thoughts on this. That's me.
Welcome, Chandra. And who's left? Misha, I think. Misha, hi.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Misha Saunders from, I work with Josh Forde at Ackama. I've been a developer, currently working as a project manager. Yeah, got to write a little bit of rules as code stuff sort of 5 or 6 years ago, and then I've gotten to circle back around to it as part of this project. So yeah, been good. Yes, I am, as you can probably tell by the sound of my voice, not originally from Aotearoa. Yes.
Welcome, welcome. So, have we covered everybody, Filippo? Yes, we've got everybody?
Yeah, I think that's everyone who's new, unless I've missed someone.
Awesome. What I would say to the new visitors today is you'll find intros to everybody else on the call that we haven't introduced right now in the previous videos, because this group is growing, which is fantastic. It's a really awesome thing. So thank you, Philippa, for pulling me up and getting those intros today. That's great. So, Josh,
All right.
you're up, mate.
All right. Tanakwe. Thanks, Joe. Let's see if we can get this screen share going without catastrophe. How are we doing there?
Perfect.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. It's my privilege to share an update on Benefitme, which I'm aware lots of people in the guild have both contributed to or heard a lot about. I also probably am at risk of having more than 15 minutes to talk about, and I would really love to make sure we make space for Jason. So I'll do my best. Joe, if I start rambling, pull me in. Okay. So this talk does sort of assume a level of familiarity with the basics of rules as code. I'm not going to be giving a technical architecture here. It's really about the position where we got involved as an open source project and lessons learned and a bit of an update on our approach to that journey. So for me, things started with a cup of coffee late 2023 in Wellington outside of a tech conference, a very typical conversation, and it was suggested that an open source community project could really use some support, and this was Benefitme. So my initial approach to the project, and I'll introduce my company and role in a moment, was really thinking that I could support finding more resources with a community open source project, which we're really passionate around. And long story short, I took an interest, gave an opportunity that I saw to get up to date with rules as code for myself, and one thing led to another. 12 months on, here we are. So before we kind of update on the present, let's take a step to contextualize. So the theme of this slide is sort of the best of times. There was rules as code. Ackama were one of a range of teams and people who contributed to a New Zealand-based series of government as a platform. There's a piece of jargon. This whole talk is full of jargon. Through the Service Innovation Lab, doing things like design sprints, which Jason has just been subjected to and can maybe share his enthusiasm for at the end of the talk. And this was collaborative approaches with public servants, with the Service Innovation Lab team, and ourselves as software developers, amongst other providers. Looking at rules as code approaches, agile teams, there's a couple of projects that I've just given some sense of what we were looking at. And this was a really optimistic approach to working in a cross-agency model for collective benefit. And you can go and read about that to get a broader view of the overall goals. And Benefitme sort of came out of this. Just as a side note, one of our current UX designers is there on the top right, slinging post-it notes along with Rob Holmes. Really brought together a lot of great people in Wellington, which is a small government town there. But it's not always sunny weather. Winter must come. So this really portended didn't portend. The Service Innovation Lab was disestablished. There was this worst of times type of feeling. So what would happen to the projects, and you can see what was done documented on the website previous, but a collective of individual citizens who then would sort of have day jobs, look to try a decentralized initiative to work on this. And they formed the Digital Aotearoa Collective with a great mission statement that I think speaks for itself in terms of civic digital infrastructure, technologists, people moving public sector ideas and theory forward, shipping practical services with a, I don't know if bicultural approach is the right formal term, But in terms of how they approach and wish to move on, Mato is the collective pronoun. So it's when you would use a discussion in Māori, you would speak about something being ours, and they've just established that as a name to continue. So very much a collective, collaborative approach that led to a range of documentation, a range of projects, and they received grant funding from Cardano to continue the work out of the Service Innovation Lab. And Joe, who's here, may be able to connect the dots more concretely, but Benefitme sort of was a significant part of the result of that. It's all publicly documented there, which I've linked. So within the limitations of time, I hope that kind of sets things up where I would have a cup of coffee and sort of having this invitation to join a project which we were new to. So on to Benefitme. This really embodies this core concept of a rules as code opportunity. The term would be an eligibility checker, and I'm aware it's a small screen. If anyone needs these transcribed or anything, I'm happy to do that. But the top level headings there, what benefits can we calculate? And then on the right, payments you're eligible, is the basic digital service that we would be providing, with some added kind of aspects that are relatively important, like explaining to you why you're entitled to these processes, as well as the concept that Benefitme is really citizen-centered and independent of any government agency there with its open source sort of practice. So I hope that gets across the basic service that we would propose to provide. And at the point we were there, we had all of the existing benefits, 4 of them there to pick up on as a use case, while coming to the project to take things forward. So on to Friends with Benefits. We felt we couldn't do this alone. So Ackama, I'm a co-founder and director, are an independent software consultancy. We have an office in Wellington, we have an office in Melbourne. We had this broader exposure to government as a platform ideas, but we weren't inside government. So that was both an opportunity, but also a challenge for us to go beyond building digital systems to actually really own, designing and operating proposed services. But Citizen Advice Bureau had been part of the project, and we worked really closely with them to just really flesh out our understanding of what the project was about. And then we were successful in achieving Boren Foundation support, which I'm about to talk to in terms of the challenge to come in and really rationalize or reset or refocus our view of the project there. So I don't expect you to read all of these words, but this actually came out of the funding application. And the alignment that we had to do was, look, in simple terms, we want to get our heads around this rules as code thing, but there was a little bit more to it than that, than just a backlog of stories. So we made the case really to explain ourselves to a funder who had different objectives. But Boren Foundation is a fantastic project, and I encourage you to Google them as an operator whose purpose is about enabling projects where everyone understands the role and value of the law, and everyone enjoys the protection and opportunity that it provides. However, traditionally, most of the grants that are on their website are by and for lawyers. In fact, they require the involvement of a lawyer. So this was a really interesting concept for me. However, breaking that down to looking at why would someone fund this project, you know, who are our clients? And the baseline problem and solution needed to be articulated. And we took care to have discussions with these headings you can see below to really check that we felt there was a genuine problem and that was not a technical solution sort of looking for a proof of concept. So our clients, we needed to justify to ourselves and then reporting as we go through, being actual whānau families, beneficiaries or benefit advocates. So setting out to understand how we could make social security law more accessible, and looking at the types of barriers that we felt were there. So if you're imagining where I might have been at this point, it seemed like a big challenge to translate that to user stories, deliverables, investigating additional benefits that we could bring to bear. However, we could sort of set that as our technical objective of the service that could be brought to a delivery team. So clear, personalized benefit information in a digital website seems like a pretty good target to me. However, we actually wrote Citizens Advice Bureau into some of the activities. So they would provide for us quality assurance in terms of the tools, advice, and the work that we did, surveying their network as a channel to benefit advocates, and then providing us the assurance that as software developers, we were doing the job right, in simple terms. So slightly different lens on that. Came across an interview from Ben Hoffman, who's actually the Citizens Advice Bureau sort of lawyer who was involved in the project. He's one of 3 lawyers that he knows who specialize in beneficiary advocacy. So there's a full interview he's given just on just as a general media piece. But for me, it really crystallizes where this problem might be coming from, and also where we're talking about technology, where there's a large opportunity to change things there. Oh, I'm skipping 2 slides. I've changed my dial. So Ben's quotes that really resonated with me were bringing that legal perspective to this as a problem. So I think we can all intuitively understand that if people feel barriers to getting entitlements and social security acts, that's a sort of general civic concern, a barrier, a sort of a justice issue, an equity issue for society. However, it's quite interesting hearing a barrister speak about his concerns around the resourcing in this space. It almost seems obvious that beneficiaries themselves are not going to have the resources to challenge the Ministry of Social Development in the courts. So you have a lot of capability for policy to be applied erroneously or without transparency, where you don't have a workforce of professional lawyers and advocates to really hold things to account. So I thought that was a really interesting interview that he's quoted in, and I will make sure these slides get circulated so you don't have to read all of the detail. Oh. Okay, so into the guts of what we've been doing. So 5 key stages here: consolidation, which I think I've alluded to, and then I'll get into how the work has progressed. So for us, the technology had been built and delivered in quite an MVP sort of approach that involved a fair amount of infrastructure, because lots of people were coming together to sort of make it happen, for lack of a better word. So Catalyst Cloud had sponsored a server, which was great. The OpenFisca open source GitHub, which I should probably have a link to, was there with a range of people with rights to the master branch. Salsa had contributed to build the Drupal front end to Benefitme, and we're hosting that on a significantly discounted basis inside their own infrastructure, which included Drupal, but obviously included a production instance and the ability to test and deploy and their modules there. Also a lot of dispersed artifacts, Miro boards, design artifacts, and research that spanned many years, previously looking to understand and reuse existing research. So there's quite a bit of effort just to bring everything together so we could get started. And we took this approach of being really budget efficient. So ultimately, Salsa contributed and continued to contribute. There were some updates because of the way that Drupal works, and they sort of came to the party to do that upgrade, which was a way that we could be practical and continue to benefit from the project without sort of restarting or as developers kind of deploying our own approaches, which would take time, add risk, and not add any value in the stage of this. Step 2, validating the service. So this is probably the activity I'm most pleased with, and it happened almost immediately once, in fact, before we got the grant formally approved. We surveyed benefit advocates. So 78 respondents. I think it's really interesting. 71% say it's useful. I'm really interested in those who say potentially useful and that gap. But it was a really great endorsement underpinning this because Ackama, although we have human-centered design and UX research, just don't have the experience that it's possible for us to judge. That surveying and feedback also gave us a huge amount of qualitative suggestions and direction, which was hugely relevant to us kind of at this point of having a prototype in place. Step 3. I have gone way over time, I apologize. Okay, so in terms of adding more benefits, this was one of the core things that was missing from the existing proposal. Social Security Act has several social security benefits, and we took an approach of actually working with people we knew. So Hamish Fraser was involved in inducting our team into the project, both how OpenFisca would work, but also the fact he had been coding many of the benefits meant that we wanted to replicate and get those efficiencies. We brought the project up to 7 benefits, and I would love to see us kind of finish the job. I think the whole Social Security Act in New Zealand is a really good target, and from the feedback in slide 2, we have a good cost benefit that we took into account in terms of deciding what we could do. I would not gloss over the challenge for getting the right skill set, though, to do that benefit coding. And we did think about that quite carefully in terms of who were the right people, who had the right mindset, and how to allocate them. As well as it might be more efficient from a cost point of view to have a single developer, but that's not necessarily the sort of best workflow. So that was an interesting ongoing series of check-ins for us at Ackama. So this is sort of where we're at now. We're launching a live MVP, and you're the first forum that we're talking about this project, but we're going to be going and speaking through some of the Citizens Advice Bureau channels. They're in the process of giving us some quality assurance, and I received that over the week, and I can tell you that it was very robust, so we're thrilled to get it. Need to go through that in detail. Really want to establish that what we ship to real users is covered off from a perspective of being appropriate and safe, for lack of a better word. We now have a lot of ideas on how to take things forward and refine the overall vision of the service, which I don't think I have time to talk around, but my next slide there should give you a sense of it. And ultimately, the goal is that we achieve some results. So we really see the community benefit advocate as the initial channel. Although the website is itself public, we see advocates giving us the expertise to actually say, yes, we're doing a good job, we're making things easier. And also we see them often being a power user of the site when it's fully deployed. So in terms of 3 future ideas that excite me, I already mentioned finishing the job. There's the scope to look at additional New Zealand benefits or compensation schemes. Health, disability has been quite controversial in the media from a calculation perspective. And the third aspect is all of this feedback and context has given us lots of suggestions of different ways we could do this if we were to start over. And I see that as a really positive thing where we're prototyping and trying to sort of ship a solution. We now have a lot of ideas of where we could take it. I suppose the unspoken thing that springs to mind to me is, although it's open source, in my mind, we've sort of appointed Citizens Advice Bureau as the owner of the service. And where we're at is in terms of achieving some of that sustainability because Citizens Advice Bureau's funding does not come easy. So in terms of summing up, I have found the technical project quite challenging from a practicality point of view, but I'm really intrigued with the business context of how technology can solve some of these sort of business or societal needs. The lack of professional legal support that's funded in this environment, the opportunity that government departments have to adopt these approaches, eligibility calculation, but also in terms of ensuring people actually continue to receive and take and recheck what they're entitled to, has a lot of value for agencies who see this as part of their mandate. And a way to connect the dots from this sort of open source, let's just ship something quick and fast, and sort of seeing that really have strong potential to deliver on a need that I believe we understand at this point. So we're on a journey to find a more sustainable model, but it gives us a great milestone here. So thank you for the opportunity to present. And a quick opportunity just to say thank you and acknowledge a long cast of people who have contributed big and small aspects to the project at this stage. So that's my talk, and happy to take any questions if we have time for it.
I think we probably do. It's such a big project. Does anybody have anybody that yes, indeed, Marty. Any questions from anybody specifically about this project? I have one. Well, I have more than one, but I have one. The QA process, Josh, that you've undertaken with Ben is really interesting. This is a whole new emerging field, lots of work going on all over the world, and there aren't kind of standards, as far as I know, or standard approaches for how you do QA stuff on any of these services, right? Yeah, I'm interested to know how you found Ben, and yeah, whether you'd be keen to share that process that you went through.
Sure. I think I would say, in general, lawyers and software developers tend to approach problems in different ways that reflects their training. And I think we probably have a bit of a unique opportunity to collaborate. So we didn't know Ben, Citizens Advice Bureau knew Ben. So we have an opportunity to kind of access a power lawyer in this who is very scarce. We didn't understand how scarce that knowledge was. Ben himself, to give him some credit, had actually hacked his own implementation of the Social Security Act. So we had a pretty unique individual there. So I would say lucky from that perspective. I would say a traditional software QA process wasn't really the point so much as getting someone to look at the final reference that we had. We explored getting some test cases written through benefit advocates, and I think probably found there's just enough context to develop that people weren't able to meaningfully kind of help in a way that would make things more productive. And I think QA of this is actually a really tricky field. So I would probably say, just in general terms, Ben is amazing. Ben wanted to build Benefitme himself and probably found us as a vehicle to do that. I think the aspect is Ben professionally challenges the Ministry of Social Development in court. So his view of how to make change, he may be able to use this as a tool for himself to maybe gather data of this. He's not doing the work necessarily to provide his own legal fees. He's there to defend people who face injustice or errors of judgment. So I guess I would say I hope that in the long term it's a bit of a coalition type of approach, and I wouldn't say find a heroic lawyer who's passionate about these types of issues is necessarily likely to be something you can repeat on other projects.
Awesome.
Josh, can I just follow up that answer? Because I think something that was fascinating for me when we were working on this project was that in talking with Citizens Advice Bureau, one of the things that they said to us was, well, there's the law and then there's how it's implemented. And actually, in terms of advising beneficiaries, you need to be advising them about how it's implemented. And so if you have somebody who's coming through, this is just to kind of belabor the point a bit that you were making, Josh, or maybe make it a bit more clear. Somebody who is going with the letter of the law may be advising people differently from the outcome of consistent beneficiary cases. And that was a wrinkle that I certainly hadn't come across before, that actually the law might not be right, even if it's technically correct.
It's ambiguous, right? There's a lot of room for movement in areas, yeah.
It can be more than ambiguous. It can be just inconsistent with how it is actually being implemented. It can be literally wrong.
One thing I would say on that is that I think one positive of being outside of government at this stage is that we sort of didn't have to engage with the implications of that. And I wanted to be careful. We believe that MSD is making errors, but what large organization doesn't? So I didn't want to sort of surface a huge policy operational trade-off. I just wanted to prove a service was useful for the end user, and sort of hope that the other levers could or would have the information to sort of consider that from there. And I think the government as a platform in some ways has a really challenging perspective, because if you've now identified that your organization kind of, breaches a really complex part of an act, what do you do about that? And changing policy is quite challenging. Changing operations is very hard. So through working with an independent citizen advocate, we get to sidestep some of the what do we do about this stuff that can make it sort of like treacle to progress.
And speaks to the value of that multicultural, if you like, so inside public servant and civil society and legal professional and technology professional all being around the table at the same time. That's the opportunity of this new world, rather than it all being inside government, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's not really possible for our team without retraining to become really confident in policy. So I think technical software developers can build a great website. We can look at a social problem in a UX, but we go beyond our professional competence really quickly with rules as code. So some level of collaboration, or experts who are kind of willing to go down the journey, I think is really a really valuable resource. I think this kind of technologists only building an app that'll solve it, it's only really a tiny part of the starting point.
Yeah. Such is the beauty, well, double-edged sword of open source.
Yeah.
Right? More complexity, but a wider view on actually what the end product might look like, which makes it more valuable, we hope. Yeah.
And I would just like to take a chance to say thank you to Misha, who's a project manager, who did not immediately garrote me for taking this across his desk and went on that journey as well, because it was not just a set of well prepared user stories and content.
Yeah, well, then I need to say thank you to Misha too.
It's the brains.
That's awesome. If anybody has any more questions, now's the time.
No questions, but just an acknowledgement, Josh. We've actually never met. I know you've dealt a lot with my colleagues, but just to see how you've taken it on, hearing your journey, hearing the history, seeing where you've taken it, where you're going, just congratulations and well done. Because I know a big investment on you in going into this space as well, and just to acknowledge all of that and the pain that comes with. So yeah, well done, mate.
Yeah, thanks, and we appreciate Salsa, sticking with it on this too. So yeah.
How good you're taking it further and beyond. Awesome stuff. Great to hear. So, yeah, well done.
That's beautiful. Thank you, guys. Awesome. Jason, you're up. Oh, Chandra, before, hang on a second.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Thanks, Josh. That's great work. I wanted to have a quick question. That's like how far we had gone through as the user story development as part of beneficiaries. One of the key thing what we have heard at my time at MST is that the beneficiaries, when they apply for the benefit, the same questionnaire kind of been asked many times to the different department as part of the service delivery process, and kind of quite frustrating if you need something and you apply and go to the different desk and you answer same question again and again. So as part of this service delivery, just like, have you, what's your approach has been thought included into like having one place of that kind of questionnaire could be brought across to the social sector at the different agency could use it, that questionnaire.
Are you saying addressing the fragmentation where agencies will collect the same information? You're hitting on a hot topic that I'm at risk of ranting about, so I suspect we strongly agree with each other. I think that there's a lot of opportunity for this. I kind of think this has a nice opportunity because it collects no private information, but then it immediately opens the door to, well, get, identify the person, serve them, identify their people, and then that becomes much more challenging in an in-house kind of environment. But yes, I believe, concepts like, a person's eligibility reference, I mean, look, this really should have been part of the government's digital identity strategy over the last 15 years. And, I think that there are probably system-wide challenges where it's huge and challenging. And I think breaking it down and saying, just do it on a case-by-case basis, I actually feel pretty positive about the opportunity to do that. I alluded to disability. It's actually very hard to know who, from the outside, and definitely from a citizen point of view, which agency holds the responsibility. So handing out contracts is different from delivering services, and a user on the street does not know that. And I find it incredibly baffling doing my own research, with the sector constantly under restructure. So I think, I guess I'd say those are big visions, but I'm kind of in favour at this stage of organisations or teams who can sort of just ship these things, but also design with reuse in mind, or sharing in mind.
And it came from a very citizen-centric perspective, right? Like, it was literally the Citizens Advice Bureau and a group of passionate citizens that started this project because they saw the challenges of, whānau and friends dealing with MSD and not being able to access all of the information. So it has been an outside-in project. Interestingly, though, Chandra, there is the Mato Collective. Part of their work that they've taken on is a digital identity project, again, citizen-centric, so coming from outside, not talking about the DIA's identity project at all, coming from actually very Māori, tikanga-centric identity and cultural protocols to identify people rather than your birth certificate and your driver's license. So there's work to do to bring civil society and the government much closer together and talk to each other more.
Exactly, I totally agree. And that would solve this problem. It's like information collected once could be used across the agency, because that would simplify the service delivery. And this is what rule as a code, one of the main objective is to simplify. If we, from the agency perspective, simplify the service delivery as much as possible, digitally. So thank you.
I also might find a link to another project that we put up to the Cardano community, which might come back again, which was a citizen's ledger. From a citizen's perspective, speaks to what you've just been talking about. Every interaction I have with government, I should own the data on that interaction. Should be part of my data. Yeah. And I'm sure Amy would have something to say about this too, being the data governance expert in the space. Any more questions? Otherwise, we'll move on to Jason, because we're well over schedule. I hope everybody can stick around a bit longer because Jason's stuff is awesome. No more questions? Great. Jason, take it away. Sorry, mate.
No worries. I enjoyed that for sure. Let me see if I click that. Does that work? Yes. Okay.
Perfect.
So I'm going to kind of speed through this a little bit. There's a bunch of detail on the slides, and I'll make sure the slides are shared, but the point is not to read them. The thing that I was invited to chat with you a little bit about is categorizing the tools that are out there for doing rules as code. And for the purpose of this talk, I'm talking specifically about the formalization of the rules that allows you to reason over them automatically. So I'm talking about the tools that are out there, not tools that are for like drafting legislation, but tools that are for automating reasoning over legislation. And I'm only talking about things that are purpose-built, right? Anything that you can find out there that is a Turing complete programming language can be used to do rules as code as well. But this is just kind of looking at the specific category of things that have been built with that kind of use case directly in mind. So when I'm looking at these, there's a few things that I like to kind of pay attention to. One is who is the target user, the person who's building this tool, who do they anticipate is going to be using it? What do they anticipate it's going to be used for? What are the target processes and tasks? What is the underlying computational paradigm of the tool? And then kind of more specifically, what is the semantics or the reasoning capabilities of the tool? And that's kind of the complicated part, but I'll try to clarify in a sec. And then what are the licensing terms and what are the features, which can vary in it like in any other kind of software. So talking about computational paradigms and then into the more specific about semantics, there are these categories, large categories or families is maybe a better way of describing it, of programming languages that are out there that have kind of specific pros and cons that go with using that kind of a tool. So most people, most of the time, are using something that would be considered an imperative programming language and or an object-oriented programming language. Those are the two very popular families of programming languages that are out there. And the difference, imperative is kind of the larger category. So an imperative programming language is you just tell the computer what to do and then the computer does it. So what you're providing when you write the program is you're providing a list of instructions that should be followed in the order that they were written down. And then it also has the ability to like loop and also run functions and also, various kind of structures to allow you to control which thing to do next. But that's what an imperative language is, like a step-by-step set of instructions, kind of, go 250 meters, turn right, go 50 meters, turn left, that sort of a thing. An object-oriented language is kind of built on top of imperative languages, but it kind of breaks the code into pieces, and those pieces are called objects, and those objects relate to a specific concept or a specific idea in your domain. So like you might have an object for a piece of litigation, like a case, or you might have an object that represents a user or a person or a family or what have you. Functional programming languages is similar to imperative programming languages, but they're actually more strict, and they are based on like a mathematical calculus that allows you to make certain guarantees about the code that you write. So it's more difficult to write code in functional languages, but the benefit that you get out of writing them in functional languages is that there are certain categories of bugs that are effectively impossible to code. And the code tends to be very efficient because the functions have got like lots of information about how to optimize their execution. Logic is the programming paradigm that I'm fond of when it comes to rules as code. In logic programming languages, you're not writing a set of instructions, you're writing a set of rules and a set of facts. and you're writing them in a kind of propositional or predicate logic form. And then instead of having a program that it just does a certain thing, you have a kind of knowledge base of rules and facts. And then you add to that knowledge base a question. And then the reasoner can use those rules and facts in order to find the answer to the question. And the nice thing about this is that you don't have to encode any of the questions in advance. So it makes the encoding very reusable from that perspective, because what you encoded was not a process for getting one answer. You just encoded what you knew, and then the reasoner is able to use that knowledge to find an algorithm for whatever answer it is you're looking for. And then array-based, I included just as another example. This is like something that even most programmers don't know, that array-based programming is an actual paradigm. But if you ever want to see something that seems absolutely insane, array-based programming is really astonishing to look at. You can have an entire program that's literally 12 characters long. So just another example of how these things can be different. So inside each of those large categories, you also have to kind of look at what are the semantics of the particular tool that you're looking at. And like, this is a comp sci thing. I'm not a comp sci person. I'm a political science and law person first. So I'm coming to this as an amateur. So don't take this as gospel, but this is kind of how I understand the idea of semantics and syntax in programming languages. So the semantics is the rules that you use to figure out what you wrote down actually means, right? And the semantics that your tool uses sets the boundaries of what kinds of reasoning that tool is capable of doing. So I have an example here. The first example, if something is human, it's mortal, right? So let's just imagine that you have a way of writing that in a syntax for a programming language, right? And you can have the same syntax across multiple different tools, but if those tools have different semantics, then they will be able to answer different questions or unable to answer different kinds of questions. So for example, if you give the program, if something is human, it is mortal, in some tools, if you ask the question, when is something not mortal, it won't have an answer because the semantics doesn't allow it to reverse the meaning of the rule in that way. In other tools, it can reverse the meaning of the rule. And when you ask, when is something not mortal, it will say on the basis of that rule, when it is not human. And there's other languages that use a propositional logic instead of a predicate logic, in which you can't really ask questions about categories of things. You have to ask about specific things. And so asking, are there any things that are mortal, isn't possible in a propositional tool. It's only possible in a predicate tool. So that's an example of kind of how the semantics of the underlying tool matters in terms of what you want to do. Another example is the simple math equation x equals a plus b. In some programming languages, that phrase is only capable of calculating x, right? If you wrote that in the code, the software now knows how to calculate x, but it doesn't know how to calculate anything else. In other languages, when you write that into the code, the program can calculate any of those three variables if you give it the other two, right? So that's an example of how semantics is different across different tools, even if the syntax is identical. So that said, the big category is tasks. So I'm just going to very quickly go through 3 different main task categories for rules as code tools and look at some examples in them and just kind of briefly point out some stuff. The first big task is micro simulation. So this is a tool is for setting up a way that usually benefits and tax laws can be calculated. So if this is the person's income, then this is what their taxes will be, or this is the benefits that they will qualify for, or what have you. In micro simulation, what you want to do is you want to create a database that represents a large number of people with different scenarios, or maybe with scenarios that match the distribution of scenarios in your actual population. And then you want to run that code over and over across all of these different samples in order to calculate the results and then aggregate the results and learn something about So the examples here are OpenFisca and PolicyExpress, with which I think most people are familiar. Those are object-oriented programming paradigm languages. The semantics includes vector math, which is why they're very good at doing those kinds of calculations very quickly. It's because they're based on vector mathematics. And the target users are developers and data scientists. And OpenFisca lets you parameterize your rules over time. And PolicyExpress also allows for certain kinds of hypothetical conclusions and has a friendly user interface for looking at the results. And they are both free open source software. There's a third one called M++, which is actually a project of a university whose name I've completely forgotten in Montreal, and in collaboration with Statistics Canada. And it is also an object-oriented programming model. I don't really know that much else about it, except that it was also aimed at developers. So that's microsimulation. Then expert system development, right? And this is kind of like the thing that we just saw, where you're trying to let people input their information and find out what benefits they qualify for. You're not simulating many different situations at the same time. You're just calculating the outcome of one. And what you're often trying to know in expert system development is what is the next useful question to ask rather. And so that's a typical kind of feature of these kinds of tools. In this category, you've got DataLex, which is from Australia, and very cool tool. It uses a logical paradigm. It's a propositional logic semantics, but it's got some additional features, as most of the propositional tools do. The target user there is subject matter experts. So this is aimed at people who understand the law, being able to use it. How successfully they accomplish that is up for debate, I guess, but it's got a graphical user interface. It uses a controlled natural language. So when you're writing the code, it's not all kinds of parentheses and apostrophes and what have you. It's, it writes more like English. And then it also automatically generates a web chat interface once you've written the code. It is free open source software in part. The underlying reasoning engine, I believe, is recently made open source, but I think that the interface that generates the chat bot on top is not actually open source yet. I'm happy to be corrected if that's changed. Oracle Intelligent Advisor is in this category as well. It used to be logic-based back when it was a piece of software that came out of Australia also. Congratulations, Australia, just killing it. I think it's been modified to use a functional paradigm now. I'm not exactly sure what the semantics are. It's aimed at subject matter experts. You actually develop the encoding in Microsoft Word or Microsoft Excel, and then the output, similar to DataLex, is a web-based interview. Neota Logic is another tool in this category. That uses a logic paradigm that is propositional plus, kind of like DataLex. It is targeted at subject matter experts. The user interface there has more to do with like node and wire diagrams, so you can kind of lay out a workflow of how your application should work. But it does have a user interface, a graphical user interface, and generates web interviews. And Oracle is very expensive. Neota Logic is considerably expensive. Docassemble is a free object-oriented tool. The semantics are actually strange. It's like a object-oriented program that's trying to pretend it's a logic program. So it uses something called backward chaining, where if it doesn't know what a certain variable should be, it goes to see if there's a way to ask the user. And if there is, it displays that question to the user, collects it, and then tries to run the code again. This is targeted at developers. It's making life easier for developers, but you still really have to be a developer in order to be able to kind of wrestle it into functionality. It generates, it does have a graphical user interface, kind of, but basically you're just typing code into a web box, and it generates web interviews as well. So that's in the category of expert system development. And then last but not least, legal rule knowledge representation. So this is tools where you're just trying to encode the actual understanding of what the law means, and anything else that might be done, like displaying it on a web page or using it to do microsimulation, that would be another piece of software that kind of takes advantage of your knowledge representation and reasoning in order to kind of power those kinds of tools. So in this category, we have Catala, which is a very strongly functional paradigm. It was built with the target of doing tax and benefit, and really being careful about the math that's involved there, and making sure that you're able to write your code in a way that mimics exactly how the government tax systems deal with things like rounding off pennies. It also has some features where you're able to generate certain proofs about certain things in the program. It's aimed at a combination of developer and subject matter expert. The idea there is that when you're writing Catala code, you should have one of each, I think. L4 is a tool out of Singapore Management University. The user interface is in an Excel sheet, or Google Sheets, actually, and it's aimed at subject matter experts. So it's supposed to be very easy to use that user interface to encode your rules. It is free and open source software. I haven't used it, and so I don't really know a lot else about it, except that I think it aspires to be able to translate code into multiple different paradigms. But I don't know if that aspiration has come to reality yet. Blawx is the tool that I started working on a few years ago, and then really made some progress with in the Government of Canada over the last couple of years. That's logic-based. The semantics is constrained answer set programming. It's aimed at letting subject matter experts do the encoding. It's got features for exceptions, events, abductive reasoning. It generates explanations and is free open source. And then ErgoAI is another very good programming language. It is a logic-based programming language. It uses a different semantics called well-founded semantics. And it is also kind of on the boundary between subject matter experts and developers, but it also generates explanations. And it's got integration with things like RDF and web ontology languages, and is free open source software. So what's the big takeaway? Horses for courses, right? You've got a lot of different things out here, and they have a lot of different features, and you pick which one, not because there's one best way, but because the specific thing that you're doing and the timelines you're under and the people that you have available and all of that kind of suggests going in that particular direction. That's me.
That's one hell of a tour around the rules as code world. Wow. Thanks, Jason. That's an incredible resource. Much appreciated. Questions?
I guess, which ones of those have you sort of had some experiences with, Jason, and what are some, what made you then start to build your own tool, I guess, would be one question.
Yeah, so I started out using Docassemble, which is really, the idea behind Docassemble originally was you've already got these document templates that you're using for document automation in some law practices. And so a lot of information about which things do you need to know when already exists in the way that you built that document template. So maybe we could just reuse that information to also generate a web interface that would ask the right questions in the right order and then generate documents for people. It's a very good idea. It was written by a guy, I believe he works in Philadelphia for a nonprofit organization there, a coder lawyer by the name of Jonathan Pyle, and really the best available tool at the time. I started playing with it, and if you want to be able to kind of generate a page at the end of the interview that says, here's the statutory requirements that I have checked to make sure that you're in compliance with, and here's the result of those checks, and if there's any problems, here's the page to go to fix it. I just was tearing my hair out trying to write the code to make that work in Python, right? Which is an imperative programming language. And the reason I was having that struggle is because the rules are written in a declarative way. They're not a set of steps, they're a set of rules. And I was then having to translate those rules into a flowchart effectively in my head for answering one question at a time, like, did the user get this wrong? And then for each one of those flowcharts, I was having to turn that into a big long Python function that would calculate the answer. And for each question that I wanted to answer, I had to generate a new flowchart and write a new block of code. And that was just very frustrating and time consuming. And then I learned about the logical paradigms, the logical programming languages, where you're not writing imperative code, you're just translating the rules from natural language into coded language, and they stay rules. And I just immediately realized that this would be way easier if it actually worked. And so I started playing with tools that were in this area, like Neota Logic and Oracle policy automation, which are both very good, but very expensive and not useful in the kind of pro bono use cases that I had in mind. And I looked at DataLex, which is also very good, but the semantics was limiting in a way that I felt like I couldn't do things like figure out if the person had made themselves both the testator and the witness for a will, because that requires identity, and identity doesn't exist in propositional semantics. And so I found that limiting, and also it's not totally open source. It was even less open source at the time. And so I went looking for other alternatives and came across ErgoAI, and then about 2 years later came across the tool called SCASP, which is what I built Blawx on top of. And so my motivation was very much, can I build something where the average subject matter expert, like a lawyer or a policy expert, is going to be able to use it, and they're going to be able to use it because the user interface is friendly, but also because the semantics that it uses doesn't require you to translate from a law to a flowchart. You can just take a rule out of the law and turn it into a rule in code, and that part would be easier as well. And then at the Government of Canada, we used it for a couple of years, and my original use case was expert systems, but actually where it found most traction inside the Government of Canada was with legislative drafting. And so that's kind of my story working through. I've also played with OpenFisca, less with PolicyEngine, just a little bit. And let me see if there's other ones in there. L4 I have not used, and M++ I haven't used. But the places that I have the most familiarity right now would be with Blawx or in the general logic paradigm.
Josh, sorry, Misha, you have a question.
Yeah, thank you for that, Jason. That's I'm having trouble structuring my questions within scale of fireworks that are going off in my brain at the moment. But that was quite an impressive whirlwind. So I don't have a comp sci background, but I did work for 7 years as a developer. And what is standing out to me in what you're articulating, in a sense, seems to be the different layers of the stack. And so there's a two-part question for me. First of all, when you're talking about the different layers, I guess, where you're processing, or the different kind of paradigms for processing the data, have you found, I guess, a common data structure which can underlie all of these? Because what you're talking about is the imperative levels at which one has to, or whatever else that one has to interpret the data. But I guess one of the big learnings for me as a programmer was, if you get the data structure right, everything else fits into place. And so that's the first part. And then I'll very quickly do the second part, which is, it sounds to me like what you're trying to design is an ideal stack here. And have you looked at all that, trying to separate those bits out so that you can have an imperative move to a logical or whatever, but that those two programs themselves are distinct so they can talk to one another?
Yeah. So I don't think that there is a one ring to rule them all here. The the impression that I've had, see, I'm coming at it from the perspective of we've got laws, right? We've got those written down. We need to generate tools that help people navigate them. And so the starting material has been given to us, and it's been decided, and it's natural language, right? That's what we've got to work with. And coming out of natural language into any kind of formalization necessarily means that you are going to pick what parts of the possible meanings out of this natural language statement are you interested in modeling? What things is it useful to put into the software, right? The fact that there were 45 commas in this particular section of law is a piece of data that's there, but it's not a piece of data that's useful in terms of calculating what someone's benefit allocation is going to be. That's an extreme example, but it just goes to the point that you're never capturing everything, right? You're always choosing what things to model and how to model them. And you're very frequently choosing what things to model and how to model them on the basis of the modeling languages you have available to you, right? So I'm going to write Python because I have OpenFisca and it's built into, you know, the content management system that I have available to me, and I have a guy down the hall who knows how to write OpenFisca. These are all really good reasons to choose OpenFisca for a project. And then the parts of the law that become relevant for encoding are the parts that OpenFisca can represent. And the parts that OpenFisca can't represent become unimportant, right? If you wanted to have a representation of a law that was capable of generating representations in all of the other languages, you would need to know what all of the other languages are and what's relevant in all of the other languages. And that's impossible because we're generating new languages all the time. It would be like trying to have a single natural language that you can translate a poem into, and then hope that by translating it into that poem, into that language, and then out into all the other languages, that it would still rhyme and it would still match syllables, and that it's not going to work, right? It doesn't matter how many intermediate steps you go through. If you move a poem from English to Japanese, you're going to have to either change the rhyming and or the rhythm and or the meaning. That's just how translating poems works, right? And that's really the best analogy for what you've got when what you're starting with is natural language laws. So I don't think that thing is there. That you know, that central data structure, I don't think that actually exists. But to the second half of your question, can we divide these pieces out? Absolutely. So in the micro simulation task, you've got OpenFisca and you've got PolicyEngine. And that's a good example where OpenFisca was not really trying to do user interface, but PolicyEngine very much was focused on layering user interface on top of it, right? If you look at the expert system tools, all of those are committed to the idea that we don't want building the user interface to be another person's job. We just want that to happen automatically after you've written the tools. So that's a category of tools that's actively trying not to separate out the stack. Right? And the fact that you know what the data structure is going to be at the bottom of the stack means that you know what kinds of possible user interfaces are going to be useful at the top. So there's good reason to kind of combine, right? And then on the knowledge representation side, it's the opposite approach, where we're just trying to do a kind of abstract representation of what the rules mean and generate abstract outputs that you can then use in your software to do anything you like. And that's the Blawx and ErgoAI type of approach there. So there are things that you can do in terms of like separating out the stack into bits and pieces and getting more reusability that way. But the interesting thing is that the people who are making money doing the opposite.
Yes. Yeah,
right?
that's not surprising to me.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking about where successful software over a longer time span has come from, and particularly in the open source space. Thank you for that very detailed answer. That's very helpful.
Yeah, and I have to thank Pierce for that too, because I'm able to answer that question as fluently as I am because of the conversations I've been having with Pierce for the last week. So he had some of the exact same questions.
Con, you have a question for Jason?
Yes, thanks, Jason. Always love listening to you explain things. Yeah, you're incredible at what you do. Just one small thing. So I think you corrected it then. That slide that had OpenFisca, I think you mentioned there on the slide, it says Policy Express. I think you meant PolicyEngine.
Yes, that's right. Thank you.
Might want to just correct that slide for the PolicyEngine folks. And so that makes sense now. And then my second question is, or my second point was, it's a question. You put OpenFisca into the microsimulation bucket.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, what we saw, for example, with Benefitme isn't microsimulation. So how do you reason that?
Because a microsimulation tool is specifically designed to calculate tens of thousands of simulated scenarios as quickly as possible. If what you need to do is calculate one, it's obviously going to be able to do that too.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So the downside that you get from using a microsimulation tool for expert systems like the Benefitme, is that it's not designed for answering questions like, given the 4 pieces of information the user has already given me, which of these 7 other inputs is no longer relevant? Right? That's a tool, an expert system tool is designed to be able to do that, so it will skip questions that can't possibly matter. If you're building your user interface on top of PolicyEngine or OpenFisca, OpenFisca isn't going to be able to help you that way, so you're just going to have to write that code in the JavaScript and make things appear or not appear based on your own understanding. So there's more work to get the same kind of user experience. Because it's not able to answer the same kinds of questions. It also does explanations to the extent that it does explanations differently. It's really just generating a trace of where it went through its math. And it can show you that trace, and you can kind of manipulate that and turn it into something. It doesn't deal well with uncertainty, whereas some of the logic programming languages have the ability to do reasoning with uncertainty and say, if this thing is true, then this answer is true. But if this thing is false, then it isn't. So contingently, yes, is a thing that a logic program can say, but OpenFisca can't. And there's other things to do with the reasoning where OpenFisca is only ever going to give you the explanation for how it actually got to the conclusion. It's not going to recognize that under a law, there's actually 3 different ways to get to the same conclusion, which is not useful for Benefitme, but it's useful if you're like trying to do legislative analysis to figure out if you've put loopholes into your draft law, right? So it all comes down to what do you need out of the semantics? What is your use case? What are the kinds of questions that you need to be able to answer? And generally speaking, the broader the scope of what the tool can do in terms of answering questions, the slower it is and the more difficult it is to write the code. So you've got that trade-off as well.
Thanks, Jason.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about trade-offs.
It's trade-offs all the way down.
Yeah, in a very complex space. Thank you, Jason. I think that there are I have a million more questions about DSLs in particular. It's an amazing space. Thank you so much for giving us that whirlwind tour.
My pleasure. And I'll throw my email in the chat. So if anyone has any questions, they're welcome to shoot me a line and let me know.
Brilliant. And both of those presentations today will be added to the RaC Guild site. So you'll be able to access the slides as well as access this video on the YouTube channel. For anybody that's new, that doesn't know, there is a Slack channel available as well. So if you go to racguild.org, you will find a way to connect with everybody on Slack. So if you have more questions for Jason or for Josh or generally for other people working in this space, that's the place to be. We're growing this all the time. Please tell your friends. There's lots of work to do in this space if we're going to have the digital public infrastructure that we deserve. Lots of work to do. So please recruit your friends, coders, legal professionals, UX professionals, civil society organisations. This is supposed to be a broad, open tent to bring people together to make this happen. Thank you, everybody, for your patience and for the extra half an hour that you've given to your to us today, and look forward to seeing you at the first Wednesday of December. And then we're going to take a break in January, because it actually ends up that the first Wednesday in January is the 1st of January. So we're guessing everybody's going to be busy. So one more in 2024, and then the next one will be in February. Thank you all very much indeed. Have a great day.